We've seen in the last episode that the way we learn our life lessons impacts our consciousness evolution. With inner work, we lower our resistance to learn and thereby to evolve. We are going with the flow instead of making waves and resisting. This process depends on the degree we can let go of fear, as well as on our willingness and skill riding the great unknown. Letting go becomes of the utmost importance. We constantly notice the drama that is taking place with our friends and loved ones. Our awareness has been sharpened through consecutive learning experiences, and our senses are heightened. This constant stress on our psyche has increased the negative noise in our lives to the point where we have lost sight of who or what we are, and we move through life on autopilot, so to say. We are not just without reasonable goals in life, and if we have any, then they are becoming more challenging with time. The burden that we are carrying from being constantly under pressure is not allowing us to take a breath in peace. We are constantly stressed out about something, and our minds are tired halfway through noon, working relentlessly on mind processes that typically don't nourish and uplift the soul. We don't deserve living like this, and we are being robbed of all that makes life not just livable, but also memorable. What could we do, or how could we behave to lower this stress in the moment? Obviously, I don't have to repeat that inner work matters. Meditation is necessary. It has now become as necessary as breathing. All our bodies, physical or non-physical, they all benefit from meditation in their own way. In this context, we must understand the cause of suffering in terms that make sense to our limited self. As we have seen in the last episode, suffering comes from learning life lessons through shock and awe experiences. When the learning resistance of our limited self is high, spirit resorts to shock and awe experiences to overcome this resistance and make life lessons visceral. Synchronicities converge to make a lasting impression on our psyche and force us to learn the lesson we avoid learning. Once we become tired of this process, crying out, "Enough suffering," then we can begin learning gracefully by pursuing inner work and accept the flow of life. Now, we are ready to approach the issue of suffering and lessen its effects in our lives. First and foremost, we must accept what is happening around us in a way that conforms to the motto, "Expect nothing and appreciate everything." We must consider that nothing is happening either against us or for us. Events in life are fundamentally neutral. They happen through the coordinating principle of synchronicity, which is a manifestation of universal law, the universal ordering principle. The first step is to accept the occurrence of events as inherently neutral and to extract a positive lesson out of them. At the same time, we consciously decrease our resistance against the occurrence of any event. I'll repeat that. We accept all that's happening around us as neutral. We extract a positive lesson out of them. We avoid learning resistance and, if necessary, consciously reduce our internal resistance so that we can learn the positive lesson these events are meant to convey to us. Other people may extract different lessons, as everybody has a different personality, different perspectives, and different opinions, and therefore are experiencing a different impact in their lives from the same events. It is important to mention here that while any event is unfolding, we should refrain from pondering on them, as we might miss crucial information that we wouldn't experience otherwise. If the mind is preoccupied, experiencing stops, as we cannot do both at the same time. We should remember the blade of grass principle that our friends from the stars have taught us. In simple terms, it means that we should experience our lives and not use our minds to interpret our experiences while they are unfolding, but to wait for the divine time to grok with our heart all aspects of the lesson inherent in any event. Yes, several aspects, not just one, and events typically convey multiple aspects of a lesson, and often multiple lessons as well. All these subtle, experiential facets would be lost if our limited mind would ponder on them while an event is unfolding. The mind is simply not equipped to assess the deeper meaning of an event beyond the obvious. Only the heart can intuitively extract other experiential information through its own senses beyond the five senses that we are familiar with. The mind is unable to sense these experiential layers, and even if it did, it wouldn't understand them. That's the job of the heart. In time, the heart will extract all or most of these layers intuitively, depending on the degree of awareness we have cultivated, and reach its conclusions. There is more around us that we are presently unable to comprehend compared to what we can comprehend. However, there's no doubt that in time we will. Okay, so while we experience the events in our life in this way, we can minimize and gradually erase suffering that is our own creation. We can still sense suffering in the world that we are not responsible for, but we can strive to actively reduce the pain and suffering that we are generating for ourselves. Through inner work, we can train our limited mind to accept events as neutral. Next, we can constantly remind our limited self of this fact in waking life after meditation. This way, there is a natural continuity of the state of being we experience between the higher states of consciousness during meditation, where we are closer to being our true self, and the lower states of consciousness in waking life, where we are closer to being our limited self. In the context of learning our life lessons gracefully, without suffering, we must only remember that the true self is infinite. We are infinite, luminous beings who have a limited, mortal, and temporary experience. And our experiences as the specific characters in life are limited to the scope of this lifetime only. This way, even our limited mind can easily accept that this temporary lifetime is essentially contained within our infinite self. The experience of suffering, both in duration and scope, is contained within infinity. Therefore, it is a subset of infinity, just like all other distinct sets of pain and suffering experienced in other lifetimes. It is logical to assume so. Luckily, we are only aware of the pain and suffering we experience separately in any lifetime, unless we start to remember them for reasons pertaining to our own evolution. The torment of suffering makes therefore sense and acquires a meaning to the limited self. The infinite self is not affected as all lessons are already contained within it. It is a container of all experiences. If we just feel that fact during meditation and remember it viscerally after the meditation, we can not only feel relief, but we can also reframe any pain and suffering to appear literally less intense and disturbing in our imagination. We feel the difference in scale between our limited self and our infinite self, and we are now able to virtually assign and correlate the concept of pain and suffering while we remember being our infinite self during meditation. We understand on a deeper, almost supernatural level that pain and suffering are just aspects of existence. Contrary to popular belief, they don't define us. We are not them. We exist without them. We chose to make them part of our lives and forgot along the way that we can exist without them. This conscious act of reframing our perspective and distancing ourselves from the perception of pain and suffering may appear cold and heartless to many of our fellow humans, who don't realize that we are just reframing our perspective to suffering and don't change our aversion to it. In fact, we become more compassionate to other people's suffering now that we feel much less of our own suffering with much less intensity. This is not just a way to contain pain, but it is also important from an evolutionary perspective, where we begin to identify ourselves not with our limited self anymore, but with that infinite, luminous being that we are, the being that we always have been and always will be. At this point, you might wonder how you might practically achieve that when you never had any proof of being an infinite and luminous being and don't believe that. Unfortunately, it all boils down to your own belief systems, and you must adjust them if necessary. If your ego is strong and you have an inherent resistance to learn life lessons, then you won't be able to assume the necessary internal state of mind and heart to accept your infinite self. Everything is interconnected, not just in the external world, but most importantly in the internal consciousness landscape, which is reflected externally. A smart approach would be to assume an honest attitude and to strike a deal with your limited self for as long as you feel you can sustain it. Per this agreement, you could temporarily give your limited self permission to accept that you are an infinite and luminous being. You could then allow yourself to sense any messages or feelings from your true self. Yes, it is possible. It is even more probable if you are genuine and honest in your agreement with your limited self. The infinite being inside you will not entertain an agreement that's not honest and therefore will not communicate to you what you need to know. Nobody is forcing you to do this, and nobody would think less of you if you preferred to keep learning through shock and awe experiences. This is an agreement between your limited self and your true self. Once you consciously accept that you are an infinite being and allow your limited self to be surprised, you will perceive signs that will show you who you are. These signs manifest in personal ways that you would be able to instantly perceive and interpret them. That's because these signs would come from your true self. Your limited self is only a small part of your true self, and if you are truly honest with yourself, you will understand the meaning of these signs. At the end of the day, it is only natural to ask yourself if you really want pain and suffering to accompany you in your life, and how much you want it gone from your life. This would be a powerful question that would demand an equally powerful answer. Change is the only constant in life. Suffering is not a constant, it is a choice. Yes, you heard right. Suffering is a choice based on our belief systems. Perhaps we are influenced on a subconscious level by the complacency we navigate life with, or the fear we are unwilling to sacrifice that comes naturally with exploring new and unfamiliar experiential territory. We are here to learn by constantly experiencing existence and by making associations between old and new experiences. New experiences may come in different shapes and forms than before. If they were familiar to us, then we wouldn't learn anything new. Change of perspective is induced by experiencing a different viewpoint. Sometimes it comes naturally, and sometimes we need a hard push. Just allow yourself to cry out loud and proclaim, "Enough suffering." If you really mean it, then it will galvanize your resolve and prepare you for a journey that will lead you to accepting responsibility and accountability for your life. Proclaiming enough suffering viscerally draws a line in the sand between an old way of life and a new one. You are familiar with the terms BC and AD, right? BC means before Christ, and AD means Anno Domini, which translated from Latin, it means in the year of our Lord. You might have also heard of the acronyms BCE and CE. BCE means before Common Era, and CE means Common Era. The latter terms and their acronyms were created to replace BC and AD so that they may be suitable for all religions. What the different sets of distinguishing eras have in common, though, is that they both mark a chronological change in our perspective and state of being. They mark the change that has been introduced into our lives by one of humanity's greatest spiritual teachers and its visceral effects on our state of being and consciousness. We humans have generally accepted that our perspective of the world changed at a recent point in history and distinguish in our chronological references the time before and after this consciousness change. Perhaps the time has come for us to create our very own personal demarcation line to reference our condition before the experience of suffering in our lives and after it. A demarcation line that not just references but also commemorates, celebrates, and reveres the change by which we live our lives now and how that change has affected quality of life itself. Perhaps something as simple as era of suffering and after suffering, or even suffering and enough suffering. How you label it, though, doesn't matter. Like everything in your life, it is a personal choice and is influenced by your whole being. What matters, though, is that you remove suffering altogether from your life. Beyond the obvious repercussions in our lives, it's simply not worth it. We don't need it. It is a monumental hindrance to our evolution, and we are all better off without it. It's high time we all crossed that threshold, ended our personal suffering, and guided ourselves to an experience of life without the burden that comes with pain and suffering. Let's draw our own line in the sand and proclaim enough suffering, this far and no further.